All right, we are back talking NFL draft on the Ourlads Football Network. And that means Dave Syvertsen's with us. Dave, we're not talking about the 2023 NFL draft any longer, though.
Nope. That will be in the rearview mirror for, I guess, the fall when I start making my weekly all rookie teams for the rlads.com. I post those they're usually up on the website by Tuesday, Wednesday, based on how quickly I can get them done, go through every team, every game, and kind of grade and rate the rookies. And we come up with all rookie teams. So all those guys are in the rearview mirror up until the fall season. But even in terms of evaluating how good or how bad that draft class was, you really have to wait multiple years. So we'll kind of circle back on those guys and probably 2026.
Okay, so we're taking a look at the 2020 draft.
Yeah.
And you've put together and the full article with all of the players for every team that went drafted. That's at our lads. So we'll have a link in the description area so you can go there. The ticker represents some key names per team. And of course, it's got the grades on there as well. So before we move on, talk a little bit about the grade system for this draft.
Yeah, I didn't want to go crazy with this. I really wanted to I think it's very important when you want to evaluate a draft class, you have to wait multiple years because this is still a development league somewhat. Some teams do it better than others. Some teams are more patient than others. But immediately after the draft is not the time to grade how well a team did, unless you want to talk about where you graded players and where they got picked in the draft. But at the end of the day, teams will echo this as well. It doesn't matter who thinks what about a draft class before they put the NFL pads on. We have to see these guys play on the field. And I think what I like to do is I go back 3 or 4 years and evaluate every single draft pick from every single team. And I essentially give you one of five grades. I give you a +2, that's way above expectations, right? And I'll talk about what those expectations are in a sec. +1, above expectations. A 0, you met the expectations. And then the negatives, a -1, below expectations, and -2, way below expectations. What is the expectation of a draft pick per round? When you're drafting a first round draft pick, you're looking at a starter in year one, or at least someone that's in a heavy rotation in year one. A key building block. They need to be a quality starter at some point very early on in that rookie contract. Round two, I look at year two. That's where I say, hey, you have to be a quality starter in year two, or at least a heavy rotational player. Round three, I say a rotational piece in year two, or an average starter. Okay, so those first 3 rounds of the draft, that's where I put a lot of value on whether or not the draft's going to be good or bad. Those are where your building blocks are. That's where your starters are. Round four, day three, round four, there's still a lot of value to be had out there. And this is what I've noticed doing this exercise. This is where a lot of drafts are won and lost. Round four, round five. And in round four, I want a heavy rotational player before year three. Not in year three, before year three, I want a rotational player / a key piece of the depth chart. We know how rampant injuries are in the NFL. And if you're going to be on a depth chart for 2 years and you're a key backup, at some point you're going to be starting games for that reason, or at least seeing a lot of snaps week to week. Round five, I look at you as a rotational / backup and special team contributor. Round six, this is where it gets dicey. Round six, round seven, this is where you start to blend in draft picks with undrafted free agents, right? And basically, a successful round six draft pick to me is someone that stays on the roster through their third year. And they're also a special teams contributor at the very least. Round seven, you could say this is when you're in a dark room, you're throwing darts at a dartboard with the blindfold on. But I still think if you could stay on the roster, the pack, and when I say roster, practice squad or the 53 for a seventh round pick through year two, and also a special teams contributor. So even if you're a sixth or seventh round pick and you get cut in year three or year four, you're not going to dock a team's draft class too much for that. But I still think you got to get 2 years at these guys. And after doing this exercise, it's amazing how many of these guys don't make it to year two that were drafted round 6 and 7. And it's amazing to me how many teams are having they're in a successful spurt in the NFL right now. They're winning games. They're making the playoffs. They're above 500. how many of those teams have 5th, 6th, and 7th round draft picks really contributing on a weekly basis? So, there's a couple downfalls of this grading system. How do you treat guys that got injured and missed an entire season and maybe had to rehab part of the next year? How do you evaluate someone that had a depth chart roadblock? Jordan Love, for example. He had Aaron Rodgers playing in front of him, so he hasn't started games yet.
True.
So do you really knock him for that? Do you knock the Packers for that? We're going to find out this season. System changes, right? A lot of times you get drafted by not just because of how well you did in college. You got drafted because you fit someone's system. A new coaching regime comes in, and now you get sent to the roadblock or you get traded because you don't fit that system. So I understand and believe that there are downfalls to doing it this way, but I think it generates great discussion of how good or how bad a draft class. There's a few surprises that you're going to see in here because a lot of fans will look at a draft class and they look at one player. Jalen Hurts with Philadelphia. That draft was not good, but they got Jalen Hurts, so it kind of saved the group a little bit.
True.
But there were a lot of opportunities in that draft that they failed on, and I'll talk about that a little bit later. So it's a fun thing to talk about. So basically what I did, every single player got one of those 5 grades, 2
Okay.
all the way down to -2. I divided the draft class by how many draft picks are in there. Nothing crazy, no crazy algorithms or mathematical equations here. And it basically came out with, if you're an NFL team that finishes with a grade above 0, anything above 0, that's a good draft. Anything below 0, bad draft. And anything 0 is kind of you got what you expected to.
I was just taking a quick look, and everybody can see it because, again, like I said, I just put the key players, notable players, on the ticker. And I think we only had about, well, it was definitely, I would say, I think it was less than 10, might have been around 10 of the players that I pointed out as notable players in round 6 and 7.
Yeah.
So,
and it's funny to me, notable players, that's really, guys that are starting games. But if you go do a deep dive, and I did this on every draft pick, 5th, 6th, 7th round picks, yes, most of them, they're out. They're either out of the league
Sure.
or they're on a practice squad somewhere. But you have to understand when you evaluate a 6th or 7th round pick, if they're a special teams contributor or they started 4 games last year, that's a successful pick. If they're still in the picture, because those are usually the easiest contracts to get rid of. When you say, hey, you're just not working out here after 2 years, you're bringing in 30, 40 rookies a year based on free agency and the draft.
Yes.
And training camp tryouts. Those are the guys that, so if you're still in that league 2-3 years in, to me, that's a successful pick.
Okay, so let's start first. By the way, what's not on the ticker is I asked you for your top busts.
Yeah.
And so we're gonna go over those. You had 13 of them.
Yeah.
So we're gonna go over those busts. I don't know. I don't even know if any of these I used as notable players. So just quickly looking at them, and I don't think any of them were, which is a good thing.
I didn't see any of them, though.
Yeah. So, okay. So we'll get into that as we move along here. But just taking a look at the first couple of teams, being Cincinnati and Dallas.
So really what I wanted to do here was really talk about the worst 3 drafts and then the best 3 drafts, and then just talk about a lot of teams in between.
Okay.
I mean, we can't evaluate all 32 on this recording. It would take 3 hours, right? So I do think it gives you a proper feel for really who stood out.
Okay.
And who, in both directions. And then I have another probably 9 or 10 teams that are worth discussing just because they're interesting. They had an interesting draft that are worth discussing. So, I mean, the Las Vegas Raiders, they finished with the worst grade in the league from this draft. And this was one of the last, or if not the last, Mike Mayock's year with John Gruden. And, their grade of -1.14 was by far the worst in the league. They were the only team that was even close to a -1, and they were even worse than the -1 mark. And this is a draft. I mean, you look at the names: Henry Ruggs in jail, Damon Arnett in jail, Lynn Bowden Jr. was traded away for less than the draft slot he was drafted in a few months after the draft. He didn't even make it to September of his rookie season with the Raiders. Brian Edwards, he was the one that was flat.
Yeah,
Tanner
that was the
Muse.
intriguing one was Edwards because there was his second year heading into the season. There was a lot of talk about he was going to be a big part of the offense,
Yeah,
and
he
and
start
then I don't know what I have no idea what happened.
right. Yeah, I mean that was he started 15 games. He had 45 catches, 4 touchdowns for the team. I think he's with Atlanta now. I don't think his career's over by any means. But the pieces that Las Vegas used in the passing game, he just never really caught on a consistent basis. But even that, he got a zero there. He gave the Raiders what they expected. As a third round pick, he was starting games. He produced when he was called upon, as to a certain extent. But some of these other names, I mean, Tanner Muse, he was used. He didn't play a single snap. He was a third round pick. He didn't play a single snap for that defense. He was waived before his second year.
You
John
mean
Simpson.
more Clemson players that didn't translate to the NFL?
Yeah, when we talk about Clemson's struggles, especially with this team, this is also a team that drafted Cleveland Farrell, right?
Yeah.
But
And you would think he's probably like, hey, man, it's Clemson. They got these great
yep.
players. I can't
Mm-hmm.
lose here. But yeah, you can.
And John Simpson, the next pick, was also from Clemson.
Yep.
And I'm wondering if Mayock was on that Clemson payroll because he just kept on drafting the players from that team. He did start, games in all 3 years, but he was released in December 2022, so he did not make it 3 years with that team, and that's a rule of mine. If you're going to get a neutral grade as a fourth round pick, you need to make it through 3 years, and he didn't. And then Emick Robertson, a nickel from Louisiana Tech. Louisiana Tech. He increased playing time every year. He did lead the team in pass defense in 2022. He had 2 interceptions. So there's some hope here. If anything, I could have given him a positive remark here. I'm curious to see what he does.
Okay, so he would be the
forward.
only one. If I put a notable player in there for the Raiders, it would be Robertson.
Yeah, Robertson has had a solid start for a fourth round pick.
Okay.
And here's the question, Greg. What do you think? Henry Ruggs, I gave him a negative grade. He was playing well.
He was.
But he was arrested, 4 felonies, and DUI resulting in the death of or substantial harm. That's the kind of pick that, along with the 19th overall pick, Damon Arnett, you have 2 top 20 picks. You got to hit a home run with one of them.
Yeah.
And, they're both either in jail or out of the league. So,
well, that's the whole idea when you talk about some of these GMs, and I know Joe Douglas does it. It's religion to some of these GMs like Joe Douglas. They, the character angle.
Yep.
And that's why you don't risk it. Now, maybe if you're a Super Bowl team and those are the teams that can risk it. And because those players that have issues can go into a locker room that is golden and they're not going to rub off on them. The hope is, and what usually happens is those great character players in that locker room rub off on the character issue guy, and he ends up like blending in okay. And that's how that's why you can see. I mean, I remember when Corey Dillon went to the Patriots, and they even had a few other guys that went to the Patriots over those early years that had some checkered issues, but hey, they blended in perfectly.
Yeah, I mean, those pre-draft meetings and visits, the 30 visits, the meetings at the Combine, the Senior Bowl, those matter so much. From my lens, I'm just watching tape and putting a grade on a guy. But those are so essential. And you got to have football guys in your room. You have to have analytic guys in your room. But you need to have someone that can really get a good read on someone psychologically, because I still believe that's more important than the physical traits when you're evaluating a prospect. And not everyone's going to agree with that, and that's okay. But you're going to give a young guy a lot of money, and to develop in the NFL, you have to be borderline obsessed with your craft.
The next team, Arizona, it's interesting that both head coach and GM are no longer there.
Yep. Yeah, that's a trend with some of these teams down here at the bottom.
That's 2 in a row. Yeah.
Isaiah Simmons, he just had his 5th-year option declined by the club. He has started 37 games, but they still don't know what position to play him at. He's playing defensive back right now.
Yeah, but do you think that that's his fault or their fault?
This is something that I've been interested in just kind of trying to find some case studies on, where you draft these versatile defenders, and that's a catchy, sexy word when you're in the evaluation prospect, versatility. And sometimes versatility means you're not good enough to play a certain spot. And you can wow me with all the 40 times and the broad jumps and the verticals. Are you a football player? And Isaiah Simmons is someone that just came in with a really bizarre skill set that you just never saw often in the NFL. And this is why I do get into comparisons a little bit more than others. I try to find, hey, has this worked before? And I never really found that with Isaiah Simmons. Now, I had a first round grade on him, so I'm not going to say that I didn't see this coming.
Sure.
But you knew this out of Simmons coming in, that this was you were going to hit a home run or you were going to strike out. There was no singles, doubles, triples. And the fact that they still can't find the right position for him, it's just, and you're declining that 5th-year option. This was a top 10 pick too. I mean, these are guys that you pick. When you're picking top 10, you're going for a Pro Bowler / All Pro, not someone that's an average starter. And that's exactly what Isaiah Simmons turned out to be.
Well, look, Jonathan Gannon, if he's as good as he's supposed to be, that's why he's there.
Yep.
And I mean, to me, that's what a coach should do. A really good coach should be able to take any player and make him fit. Now, whether or not he fits in a role that makes him a superstar and that demands a big contract, that's one thing. Whether or not, what, dude, you're just not going to be able to be that type of player, but I can make you fit into a role that works for our team as, a $2 million guy or a $4 million guy. But that's it. That's your career.
Yeah. And, and to, continue on this draft class, we came into the 2023 draft with Arizona talking about how weak they were on both sides of the ball in the trenches. This draft class is one of the reasons why. They took their next 3 picks after Simmons were all offensive and defensive line. Josh Jones, who's had some success, but this team just made an aggressive trade up for Paris Johnson, which to me is going to put Josh Jones back on the bench. He was terrible in 2020-21. He was okay in DJ Humphrey's relief in 2022. But the next
good value for a 3rd-round pick, though, right?
Yeah.
As long as he plays like he did last year.
Right. And I just don't know if he's going to be in the starting lineup anymore with Paris Johnson there, unless they put Paris Johnson inside at guard, which we'll see. If he ends up being an okay starter in 2023, you would say, hey, this is a solid pick. So I gave him a 0. So that means you got what you wanted to out of him.
Yep.
But the next 2 pick were defensive tackles. And the defensive front is where they're, really struggling right now. And I think this 2020 class can, be solely responsible, or at least mostly responsible for it. Fotu, the D tackle from Utah, the guy's had 602 pass rush snaps. 602. He has 16 pressures in 1 sack. And in the NFL, you got to rush the passer unless you're just going to be a specific package defender. Arizona run defense, if you're going to say, oh, he's a run defender, well, the Arizona run defense has been bottom 3rd all 3 years he's been in the league. So he's obviously not making much of an impact there. Rashad Lawrence, D tackle from LSU, 13 starts, no sacks, 4 tackles for loss. He's averaging about 30% of the snaps. Those are 2 guys that, beyond this Isaiah Simmons pick, if you're looking for some value, some capital to raise the shortcomings that Simmons put on the floor, these guys didn't get it done. Evan Weaver didn't see any game action after being a 6th-round pick. Eno Benjamin was released in November 2022, so he didn't make it 3 years. He was an average at best back on a team that was looking for a running back. So, just this, one of the worst draft classes in the NFL goes here to Arizona, and both those guys calling the shots are no longer with the team.
Well, keep in mind, though, as of right now, and I believe this is the first time, both Fotu and Lawrence, according to our lads, they're right now the starters.
Yeah, and that's because there's nobody there.
Nobody there, yeah.
And that's another thing about this was interesting to me, and I didn't want to spend my entire life doing this. I spent more time on this than I thought I would. But seeing starts as a barometer to how good a player is so dependent on who else is on the team, right? There are starters in the NFL right now that probably wouldn't make the roster of other winning teams. So sometimes you have to kind of look a little deeper than just the starts. Like if Lawrence and Fotu are both starting this year, that doesn't necessarily mean they're doing a good job, right?
Yes.
So that's always something that, I would have to go back to the Our-Lads depth charts, which is great because they archive everything from the previous and just see who else was on that team. Why were they start? Oh, okay. It was that guy who's no longer in the league, or that guy who retired,
By the way, 3 of your top 13 draft busts were on the Raiders.
I'm telling you, man. I mean, I'm doing this with every draft class. I'm just trying to sprinkle these in over the time, and I'm working backwards from 2020. And I want to make this a yearly thing. Like next year, I'll do the 2021 class. And
Absolutely.
I have not had a draft class as bad as the Raiders yet.
Now,
Of this, the 2020 draft class.
Now the next, we might as well, but instead of just doing the third, because Tennessee and Miami are close in points, kind of
Yeah.
combine them, because you'd have two players, one from each team, as part of your top 13 busts.
Yep.
The one of the corner from Miami, the first round pick, the third first round
Yep.
pick,
Mm-hmm.
and Isaiah Wilson, who was Tennessee's first round pick in this draft, is your
Yep.
number one draft bust for 2020.
Yeah. I mean, he first round pick. He played in one game as a rookie. He got suspended. And then he was traded for a 7th round swap. Not even a 7th round pick. After 1 year in the league, he and another team, I think it was Miami, ironically, traded 7th round picks with each other in order to ship Isaiah Wilson out of town. And I believe his last stop was actually with the Giants. They were trying to convert him into a guard, but I don't think there's any legs there. But he was the top bust in this class by a pretty wide margin. Damon Arnett was second from Vegas, who he was released in his second season as a first round pick. He only played in 13 games, and that was one of the picks that came back in the Mac trade. So just always keep this in mind when you see a big player traded for draft picks. It doesn't always work out. We always love to see first round pick, second round pick. Well, now you gotta get a hit with one of these draft picks, and
yes.
So you could really go into that.
Yeah, the fans I think some fans get over dependent on draft picks. It's like, I can't believe you keep trading away this. Now, we're not trying to tell you to be the LA Rams. Nobody's trying to tell you to do that. But yeah, I mean, sometimes you have to, you don't just, keeping all of your picks and having multiple, that doesn't always work for you. You have to be able to add some veteran talent to the team. And if that means you have to invest some of these draft picks, like for instance, Atlanta, being able to acquire, not Atlanta, Drake London, not Drake London, with the Ridley, the move.
Jaguar,
yes. So to be able to make it, even something like that, you have to do it. You have to invest, no matter what the pick is. It could be a 6th rounder or it could be a first rounder, but you have to be able to make those kind of moves.
Yeah, I mean, speaking of trades, my 26th graded draft in this class with the Houston Texans. And this was, if you remember back to that era, Bill O'Brien calling the shots, he was trading for players left and right using draft picks. I mean, in this draft alone, the 2020 draft alone, they were without a first rounder for Laramie Tunsil, which has worked out, a 2nd rounder, which was for Brandon Cooks, a 3rd rounder, which was for cornerback Gary and Conley, another 3rd rounder that was for Duke Johnson, and another 4th rounder that was also in that Tunsil package. And you go back and look at this draft class. This was part of the demise of this team. I know that a lot of it centered around Deshaun Watson, and I won't overlook that. But as good as your quarterbacks are, you still have to draft well. They do give you a little bit more margin and a little bit more risk-taking potential if you want. But the combination of just trading draft picks for just average players is the flip side of what we're talking about, right? I mean, you have defensive tackle Ross Blacklock from TCU, 3 starts in 3 years. Grenard is a
Grenard's got the potential,
Grenard and Heck were my 2 neutral picks there. 8 sacks in 2021. He only played a half year in 2022, but I do think he's got the potential. Charlie Heck is a quality offensive tackle backup. But John Reed in the 4th round, he spent 1 year with them. Then he was traded for a 7th rounder before year 2. And wide receiver Isaiah Coulter from Rhode Island was waived before year 2.
Yeah.
And, Bill O'Brien trading away all those draft picks, all the draft capital. I mean, you're not even getting in the batter's box at some point. And the players that you traded for, other than Tunsil, they didn't really pan out. So they walk out of this draft with 5 draft picks. And it just gives you such a small margin of error. And I really think that was his demise, that every year he was trading draft picks away for just average, overpriced veterans that he just felt secure with, but they didn't win games for him.
And that's why also, unless you're Bill Belichick and you earned it, you have to have a general manager and a head coach. You can't do everything. You just can't.
Right.
It's just too much. It's just ridiculous. And that's an ego that you shouldn't even allow to have on your franchise. If you want that, well, go somewhere else.
I think we will see less and less of that now. With just the amount of information that's available to us. It's not just about watching tape anymore. You need an entire staff of guys really kind of making these personnel decisions. And I think this is something interesting to follow. The teams that have obvious front office head coach cohesion, their success year to year is much more repeatable than teams that have just two fighting egos that just don't agree with, who has the final call on this, who has the final call on that. And,
yes.
So let's get into, the Jets. I mean, I would love to see what your thoughts are on the Jets with this draft class.
Oh, it's amazing, but it just shows you that a couple of things. First of all, one, that as an inexperienced general manager, I think this is what you see a little bit, because this is his first draft. It was obviously and clearly been his worst draft. And it's also why you do have to give them a little bit of time. Sometimes, and look, even the best general managers, if you take a look, you can always take a look back, especially ones that have been around for 10, 12 years, they're going to have bad drafts. You just, wow, that's a 2-year run of nothing. So, but yes, this was not a good draft, except the only saving grace is going to be those top two guys, whether or not they will eventually become the players that they were drafted for. Now, I don't see Mims being that guy. I think he could still be a credible receiver. We'll find out this year with Aaron Rodgers throwing him the football. But Becton, it's all about health, maturity, so forth. And for the first off season in his career, he's got both coming into training camp. He's got the maturity angle. He looks better than he's ever looked. And this is why you have to avoid these big guys sometimes. It's not easy when you draft these guys that are humongous. And if you're going to do it, and even though he has good character, and we talked about Joe Douglas drafting character guys, the character's there, but he was still too immature. And unfortunately, that's something you can't predict, how a kid is going to handle things. And I think his character is shown because he's still giving it his all. And it's all about, hey, you know what? My body's breaking down, but I'm not giving up. And now I know, okay, I screwed up. I'm going to do it this way. And so I think we'll find out this year for sure, because he is now set up, if he stays healthy, to become the guy that they hoped that they were getting when they drafted him. But other than that, it was a disastrous draft.
Right. And it's funny. Can you try to reflect a little bit on where your head was at with this draft class after the first year? After that 2020 season, you had Mekhi Becton, where everyone was saying, hey, we got the best tackle out of that whole group of Andrew Thomas, Jedrick Wills, Tristan Wirfs, right? Denzel Mims flashed as a rookie.
Yep.
LaMichael Piron was your third leading rusher. You had Bryce Hall, who was starting games.
Bryce Hall he was starting.
So it's funny.
And the punter. You had your punter.
Brandon. So after a year, and this is a lesson we should all learn, myself included, you can't evaluate a draft after a year. You just can't. It's not. You can say we're in the right direction, but I'm looking at all these guys. There is a good chance that in 2024, this time next year, none of these guys are on the team.
Absolutely.
Now, if Becton plays well, I think they'll re-sign him. I know they declined the 5th-year option, but there is a scenario. I would even say the majority would say that these guys won't be on the team next year. So some of them already aren't, obviously. Cameron Clark, though, wasn't he just recently brought back in a player development type role?
I didn't even notice. Tell you the truth.
He had to medically retire. He was taken off the field in an ambulance. So, again, you don't want to dock the draft class because a guy got hurt, especially something like that.
Yeah.
But I think I did read that he was brought back to the organization in a front office type role. But anyway, it's just something just to remember. I mean, Dameon Pierce, everyone's going nuts over him after being a 4th-round pick and having a strong rookie season. LaMichael Piron, he looked good after his rookie season.
I'm actually surprised that he's not getting a chance to, with all the need for good running backs. I'm surprised. Maybe he still has time.
Yeah. So it's just interesting to always be patient, and patience does not equal a year. I think you really have to wait 3 years before you evaluate the draft.
Yep. And again, we still don't know. So we could look back right now. It's 25. We could do this again 2 years from now, and the Jets could move up to 15. If Becton and Mims and Bryce Hall, who are still on the team, and even Ashton Davis, if they actually give the Jets what they wanted, especially if they become a playoff team and you start watching them in big moments, as opposed to being a terrible team and not getting any recognition whatsoever.
So, another team that I want to touch on is a team that I think could be in the running for the worst team in the NFL this year. They're definitely in the running
Chicago?
Well, we don't want to piss those guys off. I actually think that there's a chance that Los Angeles Rams are going to be very, very bad this year.
Wow.
I understand they have Stafford and Cooper Kupp and Aaron Donald, and you say, how can a football team with those guys be that bad?
Wow.
But go look at the Ourlads depth chart. They're in almost half the roster is green, meaning rookies, and most of those guys are undrafted rookie free agents. And again, why is that? And remember, this was an era where the Rams were just shipping away first round picks.
That's right.
They haven't picked a first rounder in how long, right? 2016, I think, is the last time. And so I go back and look at this draft class. This was a pretty rough draft class overall. They had a couple of guys that had flashed early on. Cam Akers led the team in rushing as a rookie in 2020. He did lead the team back here in 2022, coming back from that Achilles injury. So this will be a big year for him to see what he's got. Based on watching him on tape last year, I think it's done. I don't think he's going to all of a sudden blossom. We'll see. Van Jefferson, he was the number 2 receiver on the 2021 Super Bowl team. Fought injuries a lot in 2022, as a lot of the roster. But from there, complete nosedive. And I think this is a key reason why this roster is very weak beyond those top guys that we already talked about. Terrell Lewis and Terrell Burgess, both third-round picks, both waived in year number 3. Neither were ever productive or a key part of that defense. So you have 2 swings and misses on round 3, an area where I said you need to find your starters, right? Round 4, they get a tight end, Bryson Hopkins. He's got 1 career start, 8 career catches.
Ugly.
Jordan Fuller is the one positive on day 3, quality safety. Then you have 3 7th-round picks. Clay Johnston, waived his rookie year. Sam Solomon, the kicker, he never played. And Tremaine Antrim, who has been struggling to stick to that team that is probably one of the worst offensive lines in football right now, and he can't hang. 7th-round pick, you don't want to dock him too much there. But this draft class, also with the 2021, even the 2022 draft class, are key reasons why you can look at this team right now and say, hey, they're going to struggle in 2023.
Yeah, and we've talked about it all off season, but that doesn't mean, depending on how they look at it going forward, they could still kind of right the ship as long as they now go back to trying to rebuild the team and do it this way, like they did this off season, and just keep, hey, we're gonna just, but they have to draft well. And that's the thing. And they haven't exactly done a great job of that, like you just said. In this particular draft here. So even Van Jefferson is a guy that he's not a 2nd-round draft pick right now. He's a 4th. That's really what he is. Maybe a 3rd at best. Mm-hmm. And Cam Akers is obviously not. He's a 4th also. Maybe a 3rd at best. So,
that day 2 really hurt them. Those 2 seconds and 2 thirds, like none of them are really blossoming into what you thought they could be. And when you do that in a draft and walk out of that, 4 picks in day 2, and they're just not a part of your future, they're not a part of your nucleus, it's a huge missed opportunity.
Also, now, because I do want to obviously reference the top teams. And you have Cincinnati and Dallas as the top 2 in this particular draft. And this Duke Tobin has done a really good job with the Bengals, especially when his hands are tied especially early on. And really, even still, they're still a franchise for the most part that it's all about the draft. They hardly ever go the free agency route. When they do, it's like once every 5 years. And that shows you that. And now look, they've been very competitive. They were very competitive during the Marvin Lewis run. They just never won in the playoffs. And now they're back to being where they need to be because they did the right thing. And that is, whether it's luck or not, they got the quarterback. But they also have other players besides Joe Burrow, though.
Yeah, they definitely lucked out in finishing with the number 1 overall pick in a year where Joe Burrow was coming out. Local kid, too. Just like almost just like kind of a story that was made in heaven here for them. But like you said, T. Higgins, first pick of the 2nd round, he was a starter right away. He's the number 2 receiver on a team that has one of maybe just a few number 1 guys. Like if Jamar Chase is not there, T. Higgins is number 1 wide receiver. he's about to get paid. I mean, we're going to see, he'll probably be the next one, maybe the next two wide receivers in the NFL that's going to get paid big, big money. And it sounds like they're planning on keeping Burrow, Chase, and Higgins. They're going to throw all the money at those three guys, and it's probably you're going to have some give and take elsewhere on the roster. But I just bring that up because you're getting a second round pick here. We just talked about how the Rams fell apart in the second day two. The Bengals are getting a receiver that's probably going to end up one of the top 10 highest paid receivers in the NFL within the next 2 years. And then you look at round three, also day two. This is where you build the nucleus. Logan Wilson. I mean, he's led the team in tackles 2020-21 and 2022. He's a starter in year two, and he's the nucleus of that defense. A very underrated defense too. Everyone talks about Burrow and Chase. That defense is a big part of the reason why they're still there. And this is a team that doesn't trade often in the draft, so they usually pick 7 guys and year in, year out. Very rarely do you see them trade up, trade down, trade picks during the season. Only one of their 4 day 3 picks is off that team. Everyone else is a contributor. Even their 7th round pick, Marcus Bailey, he was top 6 in the NFL in special teams tackles. He's seen some starts because of injuries. He's one of their emotional leaders on that team as a 7th round pick. And that's just one of the best values that you get in the entire draft from that round. So this is tied for the best draft in the NFL. But if I had to pick between them and the Cowboys, who had the next best draft, in my opinion, I'm going with Cincinnati mainly because of those first 3 picks.
Yeah, I mean, because I look at Dallas and I see, here's the thing is because the center is an important player to point out here, because he's been starting for them for pretty much his whole career, but he's not very good. He's just okay, but he's 4th round pick, so that's okay as well. So you're basically getting a guy that's just he's all right, but he wasn't a 2nd round pick. He wasn't even a 3rd or a 1st. So you are getting a guy that started for you, but that's one of those things where how did you kind of grade him? Because he's an interesting kind of player to kind of zero in on your formula.
He actually was one of the guys you really had to do a little bit more work on, and I gave him a +1, and I ended up giving CeeDee Lamb a +2. I'll talk about him in a sec. So this is you go back and forth, right? What do you want of a 4th round pick? I said, hey, maybe a starter also, but you're a key backup rotational piece that seems snaps on a weekly basis, right? Again, offensive line is kind of tough, but because of how rampant and common injuries are along the offensive line, if you're a 4th round pick, you're probably going to be expected to start games at some point in those first 3 years. They drafted him to start right away. Is that because he's so good? No, they didn't have anybody else. So, yes, you could see that he is a 3-year starter, but that was because of the situation he was drafted into. You go back to, hey, this is a 4th round pick. At the 4th round pick, that was on the back half of the round as well, so closer to the 5th round. So I gave him a +1, that he's above expectations, because normally out of a 4th round pick, you don't see a 3-year starter. And
here's the interesting thing, though, is that I see exactly what you're saying for that first year, but now we've seen him for 3 years, and they went through another offseason and another draft and didn't do anything.
Well, yeah, he's beating everyone out. I remember Connor Williams was signed with Miami, and he's playing center. He could have played center for Dallas, but they took the economic route here and wanted to pay their center a starting rookie contract rather than pay everything that Miami wanted to pay Connor Williams. And you can't tell me that over 3-4 years they didn't have other guys come in and try to compete for that job. And he beat them out, and we're talking about a quality football team. We're not talking about a bottom dweller. So, are we a little too rough on a guy that we just don't think is a top 5 center in the league? Well, he wasn't drafted to be a top 5 center. He was drafted to be maybe, if you want to put a number on it, a 20th ranked center in the NFL. He's better than that. I mean, I would say he's one of the top in the top half of centers in the NFL right now. But the thing that really the home runs that these guys hit were with the first 2 picks. When you pick an all-pro, especially one of them in the 2nd round, I mean, that is as good as you can ask for, right? An all-pro. CeeDee Lamb, Trayvon Diggs, they both make all-pro teams in different seasons too, so it's spread out a little bit. Diggs is, 17 interceptions in 3 years. Talk all you want about him getting beat, and he's a high-risk player. that's a game-changing player,
Sure.
and it's a key reason why that defense has turned things around. They were struggling to find defensive back help for a long time, and I think Diggs has changed. Him and Micah Parsons have changed the trajectory of that entire defense. Now I think they could be a top 5 unit in the NFL now, and he's a key reason why.
And then, as always, Baltimore is going to be in the mix with their franchise and the way that they draft. But the thing with their draft is I look at it more as this particular draft so far as quantity, with the possibility, of course, of both Queen and Dobbins still with their trajectory is still going up. We don't know when that ceiling will hit, and that's a good thing, obviously. So Dobbins seems to be getting better every year, and Queen got off to a very rough start the first couple of years, has seemed to have found the right role within the defense, and now is becoming the guy that they thought that they'd get when they picked him late in the first round.
Yeah, I mean, they declined his 5th-year option, but they're very vocal about the fact that does not mean they are pushing him to the side. They don't want him leaving. They're going to re-sign him. But they just paid Roquan Smith a monster contract. So when you commit a 5th-year option to a first-round pick, you're paying them above market value, right? In most cases, right? Patrick Queen is not one of the 10 best inside linebackers in the NFL, but he's definitely a starting caliber guy. And ever since Wink Martindale left Baltimore, his game has gotten better.
Yeah, and that doesn't mean Wink Martindale's a bad defensive coordinator.
No, and this is what I talked about in this evaluation process. Some of it is scheme. And I do. Luck is a part of this, guys, right? I mean, whenever you whatever situation you get drafted into, you get lucky, unlucky in some cases. And, I think we haven't seen the best of Patrick Queen yet, and they are going to re-sign him. I just think they're going to wait to see how he plays here in year 4, and then they make their decision from here on out. But what's most impressive about this draft class, well, there's 2 things, right? One is they walked away from rounds 5, 6, 7 with 3 players that are still on this team.
Yes.
Okay. 2 of which have exceeded expectations. The second most impressive thing is just 1 pick out of the 10 did not pan out. And that's Tyree Phillips, who is he's a swing tackle for the Giants. It's not like he's out of the league. The only player that is no longer on this team, which is Ben Bredesen, he was at least traded for capital that landed the team their current backup right tackle, the big boy from Minnesota.
Yeah.
So they traded into the Giants. They got some capital back, and now they have a key piece to their offensive line from that pick. So you could say that's a successful pick there. And they have long-term star power. J.K. Dobbins, his thing is just all about health. Can he stay healthy? I still believe in him if he stays healthy. And it's a position that once you start getting banged up as much as he has, it's really hard to bounce back and be reliable week to week. But, those first 2 picks, I love the D tackle, Matabuke from Texas A&M. I think he's one of the most under-talked about interior defensive linemen in the NFL that can make a big impact. I'm going to be watching him this year.
All right, let's talk about the Philadelphia Eagles. Because they've obviously done a very good job, and we even applauded their recent draft success and how they built their team. And then you talked about this particular draft, and that if you look at it and on the ticker, you can see that I only have 1 name on there, but that's like the only name that really matters, and that's your quarterback. And you have found your quarterback, and how rare is it that you found a franchise quarterback outside the first round, not just outside the first round, but even sometimes if you're not a top 10 pick, So this is a very rare occurrence, and they hit the home run there. But when you take a look at the rest of this draft, wow. If they had drafts like this over the last few years, they wouldn't have come close to sniffing the Super Bowl. This was a terrible draft with the exception of Hurts, and it started with Rager, who was just a big-time bust. Who's still getting a chance. I should say that. I shouldn't say big-time because he's getting a chance to play in the NFL. With the Vikings now, I believe?
With the Vikings,
So he's getting a chance to fit in a role, and that's fine. But he was a first-round pick.
The irony there was he's in Minnesota, and who did Minnesota take right after the Eagles took Jalen Rager? Justin Jefferson.
Yeah. Imagine
that. Can you imagine that? Imagine Jefferson on this Eagles team.
They wouldn't have had to trade it for A.J. Brown.
Yeah, I mean, in 2 years he had 5 drops and 3 touchdowns with the team as a receiver. He also added a punt return touchdown. He's he was traded before year 3 for late round draft picks, so just a major swing and a miss. And even the third round pick, who again I think you got to get a start in that area. He was released before Davion Taylor from Colorado, released before year 3 so that they could sign Ian Book. That's why he was released, so that this team could sign backup quarterback, Ian Book. He was later re-signed, so he is on the Eagles right now. If you're getting confused, he's on their roster right now, Davion Taylor, but he was waived, and then they brought him back because nobody else wanted him to put him on the practice squad. He's the first Philadelphia third rounder to not make it to year 3 since 2010. I mean, just a huge swing and a miss here for Howie Roseman. Kevon Wallace, Jack Driscoll, John Hightower, Sean Bradley. You're not going to kill them for those day 3 picks, but you didn't make a big substantial move there. You didn't make up for that shortcoming that you saw with Jalen Reagor and Davion Taylor.
Yeah.
Quez Watkins, receiver, deep threat out of Southern Miss.
Yeah.
20. He's played in 40 games. He's got 5 touchdowns. They use him. He's usable. So again, that's a solid value for a 6th round pick. But then their 6th rounder, the Prince Tega Wenigo from Auburn, and the outside linebacker Case Tuhill. Neither of them were with the team. So those are things I really want to see those guys make it 3 years, and they didn't. So they were close to a neutral draft, and because of positional value, Jalen Hurts, who just got a huge payday, he almost it's funny and it's crazy to me how out of those 10 draft picks, right, only one of them really panned out to meet above expectations, and that made up for. I mean, if you take Jalen Hurts out of this draft class, they're one of the worst in the NFL.
Yes.
This draft class overall.
Yes.
And because of positional value, you could say, hey, this draft is okay. Yeah. Because if you walk out of a draft, you have a franchise quarterback. You can't be too upset.
Another team I want to talk about is Jacksonville, because same situation. Because this is a different head coach, different GM, and they've made a lot of those changes over the last few years, and they finally got it right. Looks like they've got it right, but they didn't get it right back in 2020. Matter of fact, every year, John Osher, who works with Jaguars.com, their main editor, and I talk to him every year in the draft, and every year since this draft, it's always, so what's up with Chase on? So what's up with Chase? So that is just, he's not going to be there more than likely. But that's just not worked out. And of course the CJ Henderson thing is not worked out so far. There's still a hope. Of course he's not on the Jags, but there's still hope that he could one day be a decent player, but not a 9th pick of the NFL draft.
Right.
And even Chenault was an interesting pick in round 2 because of what a great college season or 2 he had there. I don't blame them for that. And he's an okay player, but it just didn't work out in Jacksonville. So there's still a few players that are on the team from this draft. Barch is similar to what we just talked about with the Cowboys and their center. Yeah. He's the starter there. He might even start this year. So he's starting games. He's a 4th round pick, but he's not really all that great. But at least he's starting games.
Yeah, I mean, for a draft class that had 12 players taken in, you hope to get a few more than just 1 or 2 pieces that are still on that team. I mean, they had 2 first rounders and another pick that was number 42 overall. 2 of them ended in trades. One of them just had his fifth year option declined and Chase on. Davon Hamilton, he is a building block to that team. He is almost a prime example of what I would want to get in a 3rd round defensive tackle. He's not a star. He's not wrecking games as a pass rusher, but he is just a reliable centerpiece that makes other players around him better. So I think that was a really successful pick for them.
That's the best pick of the draft.
But yeah, for them, that was that.
Which is not a good thing, but.
No, definitely not. That's like an accessory piece. Like you want that to be your 2nd or 3rd best pick in the draft. And they had the swings in the batter's box. They just didn't capitalize. Jake Luton was a 1-year quarterback with them. He started 3 games. If you remember back when the injuries started to pile up there. He's been off and on the practice squad a bunch. Chris Claybrooks, cornerback from Memphis. He is a really solid special teamer. And again, how many people know who's good at special teams, who's not really?
True.
You have to do a deep dive on that.
So that's good. That's good.
Claybrooks, their 7th round pick. He has done some damage there, but some of these other names. I remember we had a couple of these guys at the Shrine game: Shaquille Quarterman, Daniel Thomas, Colin Johnson, wide receiver. He's with the Giants now. He was waived before the end of the year too. There's just nothing that stands out day 3. And again, I've said this a few times today. If you're going to swing and miss early in the draft, you have to make up for it with someone that's going to do, get a starting job as a day 3 pick, and they just never got that.
By the way, Henderson and Chason made your top 13 bust list. So
yeah,
keep that in mind.
Yeah. When you see the same team up there more than once, that's not a good thing.
No, one is enough. Detroit, Jeff Okudah's on the list, and we still don't know about Jeff Okudah though. But once again, we're talking about a team similar of these other teams where it's different head coach, different GM, different time. And now we're starting to see that the Detroit Lions are going to be that, they're probably going to be the big, the I don't know what the correct term would be, but that's going to be the team that everybody's going to kind of gravitate to this when they're doing their previews for the NFL season, and they're going to talk about sleepers, and they're going to talk about they're going to want to make themselves look smart, so they're going to pick Detroit. You watch how many top guys pick Detroit to get to the NFC Championship game. I'm telling you, they're going to do it just because they want to look. They want to look smart.
Yeah.
So they're going to be the look smart team of the NFL this year. And where were they last year? And where were they the year before?
When Aaron Rodgers.
Well, yeah, exactly.
When Aaron Rodgers leads the division, things get a little easier to choose from. Yeah. And Chicago's still in rebuild mode.
But anyway, let's go back to Jeff Okudah, because that's the guy that is no longer there. And a lot of that did have to do with injuries, but he should never have been the third pick of the draft.
Yeah, 10 games and 7 starts in the first 2 years because of the injuries. And, he did go 15 for 15 in year 3. 15 games, 15 starts. Traded before year 4 for 2023 5th rounder. So I gave him a -2. I gave him as bad as you can get. And it's not just because he was the 3rd overall pick. He's a first-round pick that is no longer with the team, and he was traded for day 3 capital after 3 years in the league. So I do believe Atlanta can get something out of him, though. And the fact that he's going to go there and be their number 2 or number 3, but again, you don't want that of a top 5 pick in the draft, especially a cornerback. And he's not the only corner, especially in this draft, that really just did not meet expectations. But I'm wondering I'm just curious to watch Detroit in the coming years, because some teams, New England used to do this a lot, is really one of the best times to trade a player, to just get something out of them before they leave in free agency. Once you know that they're not going to be a part of your long-term future, is to trade them with that 1 year left on that rookie deal. And because teams do like paying talent that have shown something rookie money, because it's just more economic in terms of the salary cap. And that's exactly what they did with DeAndre Swift, who was the 2nd pick of this draft, right? Yep. For them, 35th overall guy. He was always a committee approach type player. He was never the guy, but he was always important to that team. And he was just traded to Philadelphia before year 4 for a 4th rounder. So, does Detroit, is that going to be something that we really continue to see trend-wise? We'll see. It's just going to be fun to track that. But I thought that the thing that really helped this draft class not become a complete fail was 3rd rounder and immediate starter at guard, Jonah Jackson.
Yep.
So what I just said about Davon Hamilton with the Jaguars, it's exactly what you want out of the 3rd round pick that plays the interior line. Jonah Jackson is the offensive version of that. He's not a star. He's not going to save the draft. He's not the best player in the world, but you got something, and this is where so many teams fall short in the draft, is they try to build their offensive line day 2. So many offensive linemen go day 2, round 2, round 3, and even round 4. And the success rate on those guys is under 50%. But if you get one of them, it's a huge asset.
And then we're going to close out with the other busts in your top 13. Yep. You had Javon Kinlaw with the Niners, who was a 1st rounder. You had Terrell, we talked about Burgess, McTelvin Agim from Denver, a 3rd round pick. And Devin Asiasi, the tight end, who was a 3rd rounder for the Patriots.
Yeah, so, Kinlaw is still there, but this team also just spent a boatload of money on defensive tackle Javon Hargrave. So they got the same first names, but definitely different results in the league. I mean, Kinlaw's played 24 games in 3 years, so he's averaging 8 games a year. He's had health issues. He's had some off the field issues. He's only been a rotational guy, and he was someone that he wrecked the Senior Bowl when he was there, and that always worries me. That I do value the Senior Bowl as much as anyone, but sometimes when someone goes out there and has a huge week, some teams might catapult them a little too much, because Javon Kinlaw on tape to me was a second or third round pick. But you saw the tools, you saw maybe dream of the upside. He had a couple of really good one-on-ones and had a good game at the Senior Bowl that week. But to me, it's such a small sample size that I don't want to put too much. That's like someone going to the combine and having a great workout, and you all of a sudden put them up 2 rounds. You always have to take those pre-draft but postseason elements of the draft process and never move them up more than just a few spots based on one thing. That's a personal rule of mine, and I think that's what San Francisco did wrong here.
Yeah, because you also don't know whether or not the player, if he's played that well, and it's like, whoa, wait a second, where did that come from? Right. That should be a warning. Now, sometimes it works out, and it's like, well, maybe he's doing this because he was being cast. Wherever he was, it just wasn't a good fit or whatever the case. But a lot of other times it's, oh, well, now I'll play. I'll play today, because if I play really good today, I'm going to get paid. And then when I get paid, then I'm going to go back to being the guy that I was before, so you got to watch out for that.
Yep. The tight end, Asiasi from New England, don't think he's there anymore, but third rounder. That's the year, if you remember, that New England used 2 third-round picks, I believe, on the tight end position. It was him and Dalton Keene, both major swing and misses for that franchise. But Asiasi played 10 games in 2 years, 4 catches. He was off the team before year 3 as a third-round pick. That New England draft that year was not a good one.
No.
And this is where we're starting to see something. And trust me, I respect Bill Belichick and everything he's done. He's a first-ballot all-time head coach. But since that Tom Brady departure, since that divorce, we've seen what happened, right? Brady goes off and wins another Super Bowl, makes the playoffs 2 straight years. New England's still looking for a quarterback, and you're starting to see, if you look at a lot of the drafts from New England, more often than not, they're not. If I did this for every single draft, this grading process for New England, I would bet money on the fact right now, just looking at it on paper, they would be negative more often than positive. They don't draft particularly well. They always do get a few players here and there. They do find day 3 value at a very high level. But how much did Tom Brady make up for that? When you have a superstar quarterback, we've said this 3 times now on this recording, how often a superstar quarterback can hide issues elsewhere on the roster. Now that superstar quarterback is gone, these drafts are essentially in off-season projections, if they matter at all.
Sure.
Really, I think this team's the 4th best team in the AFC East by a pretty wide margin.
Oh, and that's because quarterback. Yeah.
And this is a huge. Mac Jones is part of the reason, but I also think it's they don't draft well. They never have.
Yeah, and that's the thing, though. But they did draft better when Belichick wasn't in control of everything.
Right.
They had actually a much better, and because a lot of those guys over the years have departed or retired. And they're sprinkled around the NFL. Oh, they were with the Patriots. Let's put them all. And so, And now that he's kind of handling everything, so over the years, it's gotten worse because he's lost his best personnel guys. And now he's trying to do everything himself.
And I know some Patriot fans will jump down my throat here. I mean, they did draft Kyle Duggar and Josh Uche in the 2nd round. 2 successful picks there, by the way. But their next picks, Anthony Jennings, Asiasi, Dalton Keene.
Yeah, Onwenu is the only guy after the top 2 picks.
Onwenu was my only +2 in this group, meaning he was way above expectations. I put him on the Our Lads All-Pro team. I think he's one of the best interior linemen in this draft that can also play tackle. But those they had 3 third-round picks in Anthony Jennings, Asiasi, Dalton Keene. And I mean, that's just one after the other. Like, those are the rounds where you have to make your money here. They drafted a kicker that never played. They drafted a linebacker that didn't make it to year 2. They drafted a center that retired before his rookie season. I mean, it was a rough draft, and that's something that I've seen over the years a lot with New England.
All right, so that is going to wrap it up. Again, we check the link in the description area. This way you can go to the RLED's site where all of this information is. Again, it's a breakdown of grades for every team. It has a list of every player that was drafted, their positioning in the draft. So you can check that out. And also a good paragraph of analysis, a little a little bit of Dave's thoughts per team, so you can check that out. And what's next? What are you working on next?
I mean, right now I'm working on my top 32 heading into the season, and I have my 39 names that I'm going to be picking from, I should say, because I'm going to narrow it down to 32, and I'm just trying to stack them correctly based on some positional value stuff. But that should be, I'm going to start putting that out there July 1st. I think Monday through Friday, I'm going to put out the next guy. I'm going to start off at 32 and then work all the way up to number 1, which is Caleb Williams. Shocker, right? But what I'll do is basically I'm going to post that on my Twitter, and I would love to at some point talk about some of these guys with you. And we could either go all 32, which might take too long, but maybe every week we just do, 5 at a time. Just give you guys some background information on who to watch, because college football is right around the corner. It's going to be here less than 2 months from now. And these are the times where you really want to start getting some eyeballs on these guys, end of August, early September. And I'll definitely have 32 names for you guys to keep an eye on that I think are going to be or in the first round discussion at least.
Yeah, we have a ton of different shows reports that we're going to be doing between now and the start of the season. So it's just a matter of when we're going to post them. And it's going to be a combination of not just what's still going on as far as this draft class, because we still want to focus on this particular class, the 2023 class, because once we have that 2-month period where everybody kind of goes their separate ways, the fans wise, especially once they come back and focus on their teams at training camp, they need a refresher. And that's what we're going to do. And then we're going to zero in too, especially not just on the top guys, because everybody knows about the top guys, but sleepers, things of that nature to keep an eye on. And then we'll also, I know we want to talk about drafts of the last couple of years and try to zero in on players that we believe are going to potentially break through in the NFL. Maybe they did a little bit last year, maybe they'll really do it this year. So we'll touch up on that. And then, as you said, definitely talk college football, because that'll be a combination of helping to preview the college football season while also zeroing in on particular players that are going to be key, not only for their teams this year in college football, but potentially for the 2024 NFL draft. So
absolutely,
we have a lot to talk about between college and NFL between now and the start of the season, and it's going to be a lot of fun. Matter of fact, one of the first things we're going to do real shortly within the next month is we're going to get together with you and Jared Smola from Draft Sharks, since we're going to be doing a new Dynasty League. We're going to talk about the rookies to keep an eye on for your drafts, not just the Dynasty drafts, fantasy football drafts, period. So that should be a really interesting report. This way, while you get ready for your drafts, you'll be able to check out what these guys say, Dave and Jared, the players you should keep an eye on. And most of the players you're going to be drafting, unless it's Dynasty, are going to be usually first, second round draft picks, of course, for 1-year drafts. But for Dynasty drafts, you want to keep an eye on players that might be third, fourth, fifth round guys. So we'll talk about those as well.
Yep. Can't wait, Greg.
All right, Dave. Appreciate it. Great job as always. And we will talk to you again real soon.
Thank you.